Welcome to part 2 of my lectures on technical public speaking. This part is on slide design basics. We're going to be talking about making your slides readable and also useful and memorable. The most straightforward part is just making sure that what is on the slide is readable. There's a lot of rules to follow, so I have to warn you that if this talk were a dinner, this first section is starting off with a large helping of raw broccoli. Then there's a few conventions you should know about. The most tricky part is figuring out how to make the slides useful and memorable. And I'm going to cover that in the next lecture. That is the main course for dinner, definitely a bit juicier and more interesting. And also next time, I will cover some issues specific for technical presentations, which is kind of the dessert. So we're starting with readability, and bear with me. Rule number 1 is avoid the wall of text. That means do not cram too many words on one slide. Some people take the rule of 5, which says that you should have a maximum of 5 bullets per slide and a maximum of 5 words per bullet. Some people take a rule of 7 instead. I don't follow a particular number like that. I think that's too restrictive. But you have to recognize when the amount of text is getting out of control. Here's an example of a wall of text from a technical presentation. From the title, this slide aims to highlight some results. This researcher developed a simulation of caching and scheduling, and they've got a bunch of results numbers down there, but they are kind of hidden, not exactly highlighted. So then we ask, why exactly is the wall of text bad? First, it's just visually unattractive. It puts people off. Some audience members don't want to engage with a slide like that. Secondly, an audience member who is reading the slide is going to be very busy reading the slide because there's so many words, so they're not listening to the speaker. If the audience member does glance away from that dense agglomeration of words to look at the speaker, they won't be able to find their way back to the same spot on the slide. So after they're done glancing at the speaker, now they're rereading the words and trying to find their spot. Meanwhile, the speaker is probably looking at the audience, trying to make eye contact the way they should. But if the speaker needs a reminder of what they were going to say and they look over at the slide, they can't find where they were. It'll take them forever to find anything in that slide. Lastly, the slide lacks visual emphasis and organization. Everything is sort of at the same level of unimportance. This page clearly shows some examples of the lack of visual emphasis and organization. It's hard to compare numbers when they're arranged like this. And some of the main points are kind of buried. A related problem is that you are not supposed to put full sentences on a slide. Let me read you this terrible paragraph of full sentences. When you are making slides, you are not supposed to put in full sentences. You are also, for the most part, not supposed to include the use of prepositions or of conjunctions or of periods. You will find that the slide will be too busy and wordy if you put these things in, and it won't help the audience absorb the information. Basically, slide English is not the same as regular English. Here is how I might rewrite that paragraph into slide English. No full sentences, no prepositions, conjunctions, periods. It makes the slide wordy and can hinder information transfer. When I say it out loud, I can convert this to full sentences, but I don't have the full sentences on the slide. Let's think about why full sentences are bad. First of all, some words don't really convey information, in which case, all they are doing on the slide is contributing to the wall of text problem. But there's more to it than that. If you have full sentences on the slide, then as a speaker, you are setting yourself up for a lose-lose situation. One way that you can lose is that you read the sentence aloud as written. That makes you boring. The audience is thinking, why did I come to this talk if the presenter is just reading aloud? I could have stayed home and read the slides. Also, people often have less vocal variety, less modulation of their voice when they are reading aloud. The other way you can lose is that you don't read the full sentence out loud. You try to rephrase it, and then there's a clash between the written words and the spoken words. So let's take a look at this slide, which has almost complete sentences, and I'll demonstrate for you both of the lose-lose scenarios. Imagine that I'm giving a technical talk, and I have just arrived on this slide, and I say, we developed a MATLAB-based framework to simulate an end-to-end video cloud ecosystem, including user arrival and departure from a cell, user video preferences and video request generation, proposed and traditional cache policies, and backhaul video scheduling. Now, there, I was just reading, and that seems boring. Here's the other way. Again, imagine I have just arrived on this slide, and you are seeing this slide for the first time. And I say, we included user arrival and departure from a cell, user video preferences and video request generation, proposed and traditional cache policies, and backhaul video scheduling in our simulation of an end-to-end video cloud ecosystem, which we did in a MATLAB-based framework. Now, there I did some rephrasing, and I think you might have noticed that there was a clash between what was on the slide and what I was saying. So if you were reading while I was speaking, you're working extra hard to reconcile what's on the screen and what I'm saying. So there's the lose-lose proposition. You read the sentences exactly, and then you're boring, or you don't read them, and you say them in a different way, and then you're discordant with them. So, given this, what should one do? You put key sentence elements on the slide, and based on those elements, you formulate complete sentences on the fly. Here, I've done a trivial redesign of the previous wall of text slide into 2 slides. You can see how the components of the simulation are lined up here, and the results are lined up here, so it's all easier to grasp. And here's the second half of that slide content. All the key points are still here. You can see that it's easier to compare the numbers when they are all lined up like this. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about how it would be better to present this information graphically. But right now, we're talking about the most trivial kinds of redesigns. And one absolutely has to get rid of that wall of text and at least present the numbers in a way that people will process. Having fewer words helps the presenter also. When you're the speaker, you're supposed to look at the audience. But you might forget what you were going to say next, and you need a quick reminder. So you glance over at the slide. And if the slide looks like this, then you're going to struggle to find your spot and get the reminder that you need. So having fewer words on the slide means the speaker will be able to grasp them quickly when they need that little reminder. And also it means that the speaker won't be reading the words directly out loud. Let's see an example done 3 ways. Here's a terrible slide which explains how eye tracking glasses work. They've got one camera called the worldview camera mounted on the forehead that looks out at the world and captures what the person sees. A second camera, the eye tracking camera, is aimed at the eye and it captures where the pupil is. Information from the 2 cameras is fused together. The resulting fused video shows where the person is looking at each time point. In this video frame, the little green dot right there shows where the person's gaze was at that moment. So here's a redesign of it. The number of words has been cut by more than half compared to the previous slide. 10 of the words removed were the word the, which really isn't needed. Here's a third version, where the number of words has been cut by half again. But it still gets the same main points across to the audience. And the words remaining are sufficient to cue me as the speaker to say what I need to say. The worldview camera is mounted above the eye and it looks outward at the scene and captures what the person sees and so forth. And if I'm looking at the audience and I forget what I intended to say next, this slide will cue me super fast. So let's move on to talking about fonts. The E on the left is written with Calibri, and it's a very clean looking font. The E on the right is written with Times New Roman, and it has all these extra little bits. which are known as serifs. Calibri is a sans serif font, which means without serifs. And Times New Roman is a serif font. People have studied user preferences with different fonts, and they found that the best types are different for reading on paper versus reading on screens. Sans serif fonts are better for screens. This next point is very simple. Fonts need to be large enough for everyone to read. Everything has to be large enough to read. In your diagrams, in your plots, everything. Keep in mind that older people need bigger fonts. Some people even say that the font size should be roughly half the age of the oldest person in the room, which is a bit of an exaggeration, but not much. Here's an example from a student presentation where the fonts are just much too small. All the audience gets out of this block diagram is that, well, there's a diagram. This next point is self-explanatory. The line spacing going from one bullet to the next should be larger than the line spacing within one bullet item. I've got the same content on the left and on the right, but on the left, all the line spacings are the same, whereas on the right, the spacing between bullets is made larger, so it's easier to read and process. People are more likely to see things at the top of the screen. Here are two audience members looking at the screen, and they can both see the top, but only the person in front can see the bottom of the screen. You might not think about this when you are preparing your talk on your computer, because on your own laptop, you can see your whole screen. So if you have extra vertical space on your slide, let it reside at the bottom of the slide. On this particular slide, there's a bunch of space I don't need, and all of this is below this line, so I'm putting it at the bottom. Here's an example from a student presentation, and they're using a master slide layout that puts all of this blank space on every slide. So I'd say to them, the least you can do is just move everything up. Slide presentation software lets you do fancy transitions from one slide to the next, or from one bullet point to the next. And some minor animation is acceptable, but it is not the point of the talk, and it can be distracting. People tend to focus on the PowerPoint tricks. Suppose someone in the audience asks me a question about the previous slide, and then I have to go backwards, and we get to see the hexagons again. And then I answer the question, and then I want to return to where I was, and then, oh, look, we have to see the hexagons again, a third time. So I'd say just don't use that stuff and have things appear cleanly when you need them. So just appear cleanly. The font color must contrast with the background color. Here's an example of a student presentation slide where the contrast is not high enough. Don't draw things on top of your words. If you're using a picture as background, you have to make sure that it has contrast and that it's not too busy. Here's an example for the ages of unfortunate background choice. When you show a presentation with a projection system, the audience is usually seeing reflected light. But when you prepare your talk on your laptop, you're looking at emitted light. Often the contrast is lower when it gets projected. So on the left is how some words might appear from your laptop screen, but the contrast on the projection system might look like the right-hand side. This is a fairly common mistake that people make. Things look just great on your laptop screen, and then you present to an audience, and all of a sudden, it doesn't look the same. So just make sure that things are very high contrast on your screen. You can use color to help you organize and emphasize things. So for the slide from earlier that I was redesigning, here I'm using blue to organize the two categories of results, and I'm using red to emphasize the main results in each category. Here is a block diagram from a student presentation, and the students did a very nice job of using color to organize things. Blue is representing the system inputs, temperature sensor, CO2 sensor, and so forth. And green represents the things that the system can control, a fan, a pump, and so forth. The microcontroller is in the center in black, and the orange section represents the data flow to the cloud. So this is a nice use of color in a block diagram. At the same time, though, even though color can be great to organize things, a speaker should be aware that some people are colorblind, about 8% of men and 0.5% of women. There are different kinds of color blindness. For example, in one of them, people don't see the red component of purple, so purple might look blue. People with typical color vision might see the range of colors on the left, and someone with the color blindness known as deuteranopia might see the color range on the right. So one should try to distinguish things by color and some other feature. We can redesign this so that the system inputs and outputs are distinguished by more than just color. Now we have blue, green, and orange, but we also have circles, triangles, and rectangles, so we can refer to things both ways. Now, let's talk about a few conventions. Bullet items are supposed to all start the same way. So here's a set of bullet items that begin with nouns, maximum, and construction. And then here's another version which conveys the same information, but everything begins with verbs. Not terribly important, but it's considered good style. It's good to have consistent capitalization. In the title of the slide, if you are using a phrase, then all important words are capitalized. But if I wrote the slide title this way, as a sentence, then I should be capitalizing the first word only. And for bullet items, you just capitalize the first word of each bullet. Here's an example from a student presentation. You can see that here, they've capitalized every word, whereas here, they just capitalized the first word, so it's inconsistent. Not a big deal, but it's more professional to be consistent. If you copy pictures or other things directly from websites or another source, then you need to cite the reference. You can make it very small font, but put the reference on the slide. You should put slide numbers on each slide. If you have slide numbers, then an audience member who has a question can ask you to go back to slide 14 instead of having to say, could you please go back to that slide with the block diagram with the cloud? We have finished our vegetable entrees about making things readable and following lots of rules. Next time, we will get to the main course about figuring out how to make the slides useful and memorable. Some of the slides I used in my presentation this time, I will redesign next time and make them better. Also, I will cover some issues specific for technical presentations. So to recap what we covered this time, it's a lot of rules, but they are rather simple to follow. So this is the easy level of slide improvement. We aim to reduce the number of words on a slide and avoid full sentences. Fonts should be sans serif and large. Line spacing can be uneven because you can have more space between bullet items than within one bullet. And don't put things all the way at the bottom of the slide. Color can be useful for emphasis and organization, but also you have to be careful about contrast and color blindness. Restrain yourself on animations. Be consistent with your capitalization. Do put in references. Do put in slide numbers. That's the end of part 2. Next time, we'll finish with slide design. I'm Pamela Cosman, and thank you for listening.